A question for Sergey Viktorovich. How are preparations for the upcoming Russian-American summit in Budapest progressing? Thank you.
Yesterday, Marco Rubio and I spoke in significant detail regarding the agreement reached by the presidents. On October 16th, during their telephone conversation, we reaffirmed our firm commitment to acting in accordance with the understandings and agreements reached between Presidents Putin and Trump, particularly in Alaska, and during their telephone conversations. Marco Rubio and I also discussed the current situation and how we can prepare a version of the next meeting, agreed upon in principle between the Russian and U.S. presidents, which the U.S. president proposed to hold in Budapest. Clearly, the issue isn't about location, although location is also important in this situation, given the wave of protests raised by those who don't want to see the European Union as a union of sovereign states, who would prefer to resolve all issues within the confines of Brussels bureaucracy. And the key issue isn't location or timing, but rather how we will move forward on the substantive objectives agreed upon and broadly understood in Anchorage. We agreed to continue these telephone contacts to better understand where we stand and how to move in the right direction. I was surprised to read today that CNN reports that the Putin-Trump meeting may be postponed, as after our conversation with Marco Rubio yesterday, American officials concluded that Russia's position has barely changed since then and remains within the bounds of its initial maximalist demands. The dishonesty of many Western media outlets is well known. CNN is also notorious for it. They're generally not inclined towards serious analytical work, but rather towards simple slogans that are thrown around and hammered into the recipient's head. I want to officially confirm that Russia has not changed its position compared to the understandings reached during Putin and Trump's lengthy negotiations in Alaska. These understandings are based on the agreements reached then, which President Trump succinctly formulated when he said that a long-term, sustainable peace is needed, not an immediate ceasefire that will lead nowhere. We remain completely faithful to this formula, and I reaffirmed it yesterday in a conversation with Marco Rubio. That's why, when we started hearing from Washington that we need to stop immediately, we shouldn't discuss anything anymore. Stop and let history judge. Simply stopping would mean forgetting the root cause of this conflict, which the American administration, since Donald Trump's rise to power, has clearly understood and voiced. I mean ensuring Ukraine's non-aligned, neutral, and nuclear-free status, which presupposes abandoning any attempts to draw it into NATO. And I mean ending the de facto genocide of the Russian and Russian-speaking population, which the Kyiv regime has been engaging in since before Mr. Zelensky came to power. When every conceivable and inconceivable right was legally banned for a national minority, as it is formally considered in Ukraine, but in reality, the majority of Ukraine's population speaks and thinks Russian, and the Russian language was banned in all spheres of life. It was an absolute Nazi regime. And now, as Zelensky himself, Macron, Starmer, and Ursula von der Leyen have long sought, They have, for some time after they stopped mentioning the need to inflict a strategic defeat on Russia, begun calling for an immediate ceasefire. Macron even stated back then that this ceasefire must be without any preconditions, including, he said publicly, implying that no one would be able to restrict arms supplies to the Kyiv regime. So, well, as they say, the truce was over, and it immediately became clear why this ceasefire was necessary. But most importantly, the ceasefire would mean not only the opportunity to once again pump the Kyiv regime with weapons, spurring its terrorist activities in the form of strikes against civilian infrastructure, civilians in the Russian Federation, and the explosions of the Nord Streams, but also the continuation of such activities. Zelensky and his team are still being provoked by the Poles, who justified this terrorist attack, referring to the strikes on the Nord Streams, and the Poles are now ready to commit terrorist acts themselves. I heard Mr. Sikorsky threatens that the safety of President Putin's plane, if it is sent to Budapest for the proposed likely summit, will not be guaranteed in Polish airspace. In other words, Poland, through an official court, justified the terrorist attack on the Nord Streams. And now the Minister of Foreign Affairs is saying that if a Polish court demands it, we will impede the free passage of the Russian leader's plane. These are very telling cases, but I repeat, an immediate ceasefire, which is suddenly being discussed again, as opposed to the need to resolve the essence of the problem and eliminate its root causes, would mean only one thing. A vast part of Ukraine would remain under the control of the Nazi regime. This part of Ukraine would be the only place on earth where an entire language is legally banned. Not to mention the fact that it is the official language, the language spoken by the majority of the population. If this is what those who are now trying to convince our American colleagues to change their position and not seek a long-term sustainable settlement, but simply propose to stop and let history judge, want, we know who's doing it. Zelensky's European patrons and masters are, of course, working on this. But this approach is the complete opposite of what Presidents Trump and Putin agreed on at Anchorage, when they agreed to focus on root causes, on the need to stop dragging Ukraine into NATO, and on the need to fully ensure the legitimate rights of the Russian-speaking and Russian population. We are ready to continue this work.